In the past, we've looked at learning curves like this one, where your skill level at any given time is represented as a point on this graph and a value that increases over time. But in reality, this is a massive simplification, and the way an individual's skill grows over time is a lot more nuanced and also far more interesting if you ask me. Your skill level for any given game is not a definitive static number. Your skill level is best described as a range at which you perform. A range that is influenced by numerous different factors, such as the class or hero you're playing, the game mode you're playing, the map you're on, even your mood, how much sleep you've had, your environment, your state of mind, loads of different factors. The way games assess your skill level by assigning you a rank or a level kind of reinforces this idea that we are all performing at a static level. For example, in Overwatch you have bronze, silver, gold, etc. And this gives you the feeling that after some practice, after you've put enough time into a game, you'll suddenly jump up and reach that next level in an instant. But in reality, it's obviously a lot more fluid than this. Let's use Overwatch as an example. In every game, your average player probably has a moment where they're playing at a rank above and below their own. A gold player, for example, will likely have moments in a single game where they're performing at, say, a high silver level and at a low platinum level. Here's a really basic example to help explain exactly what I mean. So perhaps you're in a game, you're playing Widow, and you hit an amazing flick shot that's usually only seen by platinum players or above. But then later on you get a little bit carried away and you end up overextending and feeding your brains out. The sort of thing you'll typically see from silver players. But does this mean your rank is necessarily wrong? I would argue no, your rank reflects your average skill level, and it's an average over a long period of time. That's why it takes so long to rank up, even if you've got several wins in a row. It's a very gradual process, and that's also why you have multiple placement games to iron out any crazy dips or spikes in your gameplay. And it's not just from one game to the other that you might change. It's literally within one single game from one moment to the next. Perhaps as your caffeine runs out, or maybe you're getting tilted, there's some toxic player on your team, and you can genuinely within minutes start playing worse. The second important principle I wanted to discuss today is how typically this range will narrow over time as you improve at a game. In other words, you get more consistent. You may have heard people mention consistency in the past in other videos or when watching streams, especially when talking about snipers, for instance, because a first timer can suddenly get an amazing flick shot out of the blue, but it may just take hundreds of hours to be able to get that exact same flick shot 10 times in a row. The idea of this consistency is massively important and gets even more important at the highest of levels of gameplay where wins are decided by the tiniest of margins. Another interesting nuance here is the fact that the top and bottom of your skill range can actually vary independently. So when people talk about consistency, they obviously mean being able to make reliably good plays, but more importantly they mean making less mistakes. If you are trying to improve at a game, I would argue that the best use of your time would be to focus on the latter, reducing how many mistakes you're making and ironing this side of your gameplay out, and therefore increasing the base of your skill range. By doing this, you'll probably find yourself ranking up more reliably and more quickly. And remember, for a class-based game, some characters are just more prone to inconsistency. Typically your high risk, high reward type characters and your glass cannon type characters, Tracer comes to mind, as well as snipers, the spy from TF2, whereas other classes such as maybe heavy, engineer or Orisa and Brig comes to mind from Overwatch. These are the type of classes, because of certain factors such as their health pool and their utility, it makes it more easy to play consistently at a similar level from one game to the next. The final thing I wanted to chat about is the idea of some of these other variables I briefly mentioned. Let's again take TF2 as an example, because most of you guys are probably playing this game, or at least have done in the past. If I was to try and loosely plot the skill levels for myself for each of the classes in TF2, perhaps you'd see something like this. Now this isn't accurate by any means, but it just helps me demonstrate my point. As I plot each of these classes on this graph and then perhaps add how comfortable and confident I am with each game mode and perhaps other variables such as my general state of mind, as you can see, my overall skill level for this game becomes less and less definitive, and the skill range we talked about earlier gets bigger and bigger. To be fair, for a game like TF2, you might discuss skill on a class by class basis, but even if you were to focus on your favourite class, there would be plenty of variables still affecting your performance. And even if you're some kind of godlike player at TF2, you'll still be playing at a range of levels depending on all these factors. It's just that your range will be much smaller as your consistency will be much higher. I actually think where possible for class-based games such as TF2 and Overwatch, it's always really interesting to be able to see your skill per class or hero, and I think this already exists in some games, maybe some MOBAs, and I think this would work particularly well for Overwatch, where there are so many heroes that I honestly think there's a huge range for me personally, depending on just which hero I pick, let alone all the other variables we've mentioned. And I think it'd be awesome to be able to see an individual SR rating for each hero, even though that could add complication around the idea of matchmaking. Would you need role queues, that kind of thing, but that's a conversation for another time. Of course, the way it works now is in the same way an average is taken from, say, 10 placement games, the same applies to different heroes, and whatever heroes you happen to play on your placement games, again using Overwatch as an example, then your final level will be an average of all those heroes. But of course, if you didn't happen to play, that one support character you like, then that won't be factored in as you continue to play that competitive season. So it's by no means a perfect system, but it's such a complicated and challenging problem for developers to overcome. So I know this has been a bit of a random video, and you may be asking, why are we chatting about this? Well, for starters, I personally think it's really fascinating and interesting, but by kind of having a think about this kind of thing, it may go towards helping us understand why things happen in the way they do in our games. It may help us feel less frustrated. For example, a couple of things come to mind. We've talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect in the past. Maybe this is an offshoot of some of the things we've discussed today. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is basically overestimating your ability as you start playing a game. So perhaps maybe we notice those really good plays we make once or twice in a game, but those constant mistakes we're making that are a bit more subtle are less noticeable. Or for example, maybe this helps to explain some of the problems around what people like to call ELO hell for the same reasons. I honestly think over 10-20 games, how well you perform can vary so much, and that's perhaps why you're constantly going up and down, but never quite feeling like you're ranking up the way you should be. But anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. These are just a few theories I've been thinking of, and I wanted to kind of make a video about with some graphics to help illustrate my point. I'd love to hear from you if you agree or disagree with anything I've said today, or if you have any other points to add, pop it down in the comment section below. I'm just going to end as always with a few quick thank yous. First to Highway Star, who recently pledged on Patreon to me, so thank you for that. Also thank you to Frank the Tank 64, who's given me the Civil Servant Mark II Iron Bomber and Sticky Bomb Launcher. Thank you to Rudolph, who gave me the Strange Catcher's Companion, the Belgian Detective and the Leopard Revolver. And to Believe You or something along those lines for the Star-Crossed Crossbow and the Neckwear Headwear. Apologies if I missed anything or messed any of that up. I'm just reading some of my handwriting here. I like to note these things down and then I come back to them a few weeks later and I have no idea what I've written. Okay guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video.
One, two, three! Oh, he's a damn thing. Oh! Rock, paper, scissors. The cat. 1, 2, 3! Oh, perfect!